Captain C. H. Mullins and R. Johnstone, Imperial Light Horse. On the 21st October 1899, at a landslide, at a most critical moment, the advance being momentarily checked by a very severe fire at point-blank range, these two officers very gallantly rushed forward under this heavy fire and rallied the men, thus enabling the flanking movement which decided the day to be carried out. On this occasion, Captain Mullins was wounded. Sergeant Major, now Quartermaster and Hun, Lieutenant William Robertson of the Gordon Highlanders. At the Battle of a Landslide on October 21, 1899, during the final advance on the enemy's position, circled. Major Robertson led each successive rush, exposing himself fearlessly to the enemy's artillery and rifle fire to encourage the men. After the main position had been captured, he led a small party to seize the Boer camp. Though exposed to a deadly crossfire from the enemy's rifles, he gallantly held on to the position captured and continued to encourage the men until he was dangerously wounded in 2 places. 2nd Lieutenant John Norwood, 5th Dragoon Guards. On October 30, 1899, 2nd Lieutenant Norwood went out from Ladysmith in charge of a small patrol of the 5th Dragoon Guards. They came under a heavy fire from the enemy, who were posted on a ridge in great force. The patrol, which had arrived within about 600 yards of the ridge, then retired at full speed. 1 man dropped, and 2nd Lieutenant Norwood galloped back about 300 yards through heavy fire, dismounted, and picking up the fallen trooper, carried him out of fire on his back, at the same time leading his horse with one hand. The enemy kept up an incessant fire during the whole time that 2nd Lieutenant Norwood was carrying the man until he was quite out of range. Corporal J. Shaw, the Highland Light Infantry. On December 11, 1899, during the Battle of Majesfontein, Corporal Shaw was observed, not only by the officers of his own battalion, but by several officers of other regiments, to perform several specific acts of bravery. Corporal Shaw was in charge of stretcher-bearers, but at one period of the battle, he was seen encouraging men to advance across the open. He was most conspicuous during the day in dressing men's wounds, and in one case he came, under a heavy fire, to a man who was lying wounded in the back, and with the utmost coolness and deliberation, sat down beside the wounded man and proceeded to dress his wound. Having done this, he got up and went quietly to another part of the field. This act of gallantry was performed under a continuous and heavy fire as coolly and quietly as if there had been no enemy near. Captain W. N. Congreve, the Rifle Brigade, the Prince Consort's own. At Colenso, on December 15, 1899, the detachment serving the guns of the 14th Anth Batteries, Royal Field Artillery, had all been either killed, wounded, or driven from their guns by infantry fire at close range, and the guns were deserted. About 500 yards behind the guns was a donga in which some of the few horses and drivers left alive were sheltered. The intervening space was swept with shell and rifle fire. Captain Congreve, Rifle Brigade, who was in the donga, assisted to hook a team into a limber, went out and assisted to limber up a gun. Being wounded, he took shelter, but seeing Lieutenant Roberts fall, badly wounded, he went out again and brought him in. Captain Congreve was shot through the leg, through the toe of his boot, grazed on the elbow and the shoulder, and his horse shot in 3 places. Lieutenant the Hun, F.H.S. Roberts, since deceased, the King's Royal Rifle Corps. Lieutenant Roberts assisted Captain Congreve. He was wounded in 3 places. Corporal G. E. Nurse, 66th Battery, Royal Field Artillery. Corporal Nurse also assisted. Captain H. L. Reed, 7th Battery, Royal Field Artillery. Captain Reed, who had heard of the difficulty, shortly afterwards brought down 3 teams from his battery to see if he could be of any use. He was wounded, as were 5 of the 13 men who rode with him. 1 was killed, and 13 out of 21 horses were killed before he got halfway to the guns, and he was obliged to retire. Major William Babty, CMG, of the Royal Army Medical Corps. In the engagement, the wounded of the 14th Anth Batteries, Royal Field Artillery, were lying in an advanced donga close in the rear of the guns without any medical officer to attend to them, and when a message was sent back asking for assistance, Major Babty rode up under a heavy rifle fire, his pony being hit 3 times. When he arrived at the donga, where the wounded were lying in sheltered corners, he attended to them all, going from place to place exposed to the heavy rifle fire which greeted anyone who showed himself. Late in the day, Major Babty went out with Captain Congreve to bring in Lieutenant Roberts, who was lying wounded on the veldt. This also was under a heavy fire. Captain Charles Fitzclarence, the Royal Fusiliers City of London Regiment. On the 14th October 1899, Captain Fitzclarence went with his squadron of the Protectorate Regiment, consisting of only partially trained men who had never been in action, to the assistance of an armored train which had gone out from Mafeking. The enemy were in greatly superior numbers, and the squadron was for a time surrounded, and it looked as if nothing could save them from being shot down. Captain Fitzclarence, however, by his personal coolness and courage, inspired the greatest confidence in his men, and by his bold and efficient handling of them, not only succeeded in relieving the armored train, but inflicted a heavy defeat on the Boers, who lost 50 killed and a large number wounded, his own losses being 2 killed and 15 wounded. The moral effect of this blow had a very important bearing on subsequent encounters with the Boers. On the 27th October 1899, Captain Fitzclarence led his squadron from Mafeking across the open and made a night attack with the bayonet on one of the enemy's trenches. A hand-to-hand fight took place in the trench, while a heavy fire was concentrated on it from the rear. The enemy was driven out with heavy loss. Captain Fitzclarence was the first man into the position and accounted for 4 of the enemy with his sword. The British lost 6 killed and 9 wounded. Captain Fitzclarence was himself slightly wounded. With reference to these 2 actions, Major General Baden-Powell states that, had this officer not shown an extraordinary spirit and fearlessness, the attacks would have been failures, and we should have suffered heavy loss both in men and prestige. On the 26th December 1899, during the action at Game Tree, near Mafeking, Captain Fitzclarence again distinguished himself by his coolness and courage, and was again wounded severely through both legs. Sergeant H.R. Martineau, Protectorate Regiment. On the 26th December 1899, during the fight at Game Tree near Mafeking, when the order to retire had been given, Sergeant Martineau stopped and picked up Corporal Lecamp, who had been struck down about 10 yards from the Boer trenches, and half dragged, half carried him towards a bush about 150 yards from the trenches. In doing this, Sergeant Martineau was wounded in the side, but paid no attention to it, and proceeded to staunch and bandage the wounds of his comrade, whom he afterwards assisted to retire. The firing while they were retiring was very heavy, and Sergeant Martineau was again wounded. When shot the second time, he was absolutely exhausted from supporting his comrade and sank down unable to proceed further. He received 3 wounds, one of which necessitated the amputation of his arm near the shoulder. Trooper H.E. Ramsden, Protectorate Regiment. On the 26th December 1899, during the fight at Game Tree, near Mafeking, after the order to retire was given, Trooper H.E. Ramsden picked up his brother, Trooper A.E. Ramsden, who had been shot through both legs and was lying about 10 yards from the Boer trenches, and carried him about 600 or 800 yards under a heavy fire, putting him down from time to time for a rest, till they met some men who helped to carry him to a place of safety. Lieutenant, now Captain Sir John P. Milbank, Bart, 10th Hussars. On the 5th January 1900, during a reconnaissance near Colesberg, Sir John Milbank, when retiring under fire with a small patrol of the 10th Hussars, notwithstanding the fact that he had just been severely wounded in the thigh, rode back to the assistance of one of the men whose pony was exhausted, and who was under fire from some Boers who had dismounted. Sir John Milbank took the man up on his own horse under a most galling fire, and brought him safely back to camp. Commander and able seaman, R.N.s. Photo by Gregory and Co., London. Lieutenant Francis Newton Parsons, since deceased, Essex Regiment. On the morning of the 18th of February 1900, at Paardeberg, on the south bank of the River Modder, Private Ferguson, 1st Battalion Essex Regiment, was wounded and fell in a place devoid of cover. While trying to crawl under cover, he was again wounded in the stomach. Lieutenant Parsons at once went to his assistance, dressed his wound under heavy fire, went down twice, still under heavy fire, to the bank of the river to get water for Private Ferguson, and subsequently carried him to a place of safety. This officer was recommended for the Victoria Cross by Lieutenant General Kelly Kenny, C.B., on the 3rd of March last. Lieutenant Parsons was killed on the 10th of March in the engagement at Driefontein, on which occasion he again displayed conspicuous gallantry. Private, now Corporal, A.E. Curtis, 2nd Battalion, East Surrey Regiment. On the 23rd February 1900, Colonel Harris lay all day long in a perfectly open space under close fire of a Boer breastwork. The Boers fired all day at any man who moved, and Colonel Harris was wounded 8 or 9 times. Private Curtis, after several attempts, succeeded in reaching the colonel, bound his wounded arm and gave him his flask, all under heavy fire. He then tried to carry him away, but was unable, on which he called for assistance, and Private Morton came out at once. Fearing that the men would be killed, Colonel Harris told them to leave him, but they declined, and after trying to carry the colonel on their rifles, they made a chair with their hands, and so carried him out of fire. Lieutenant E.T. Ingsan, Royal Army Medical Corps. On the 24th February 1900, Lieutenant Ingsan carried 2nd Lieutenant de Venish, who was severely wounded and unable to walk, for 300 or 400 yards under a very heavy fire to a place of safety. The ground over which Lieutenant Ingsan had to move was much exposed, there being no cover available. Captain Conwyn Mansell Jones, the West Yorkshire Regiment. On February 27, 1900, during the assault on Terrace Hill, north of the Tugela in Natal, the companies of the West Yorkshire Regiment on the northern slope of the hill met with a severe shell, Vickers Maxim, and rifle fire, and their advance was for a few moments checked. Captain C. Mansell Jones, however, by his strong initiative, restored confidence, and in spite of his falling very seriously wounded, the men took the whole ridge without further check. This officer's self-sacrificing devotion to duty at a critical moment, having averted what might have proved a serious check to the whole assault. Sergeant H. Inglehart, 10th Hussars. At dawn on March 13, 1900, the party that had destroyed the railway north of Bloemfontein had to charge through a Boer piquet and get over 4 deep spruits in order to make their way back through the Boer lines. At the 4th spruit, Sapper Webb's horse failed to get up the bank, and he was left in a very dangerous position. In face of a very heavy rifle and shell fire, and notwithstanding the great chance of being cut off, Sergeant Inglehart returned to Sapper Webb's assistance. It took some time to get the man and his horse out of the sloot, and the position became momentarily more critical owing to the advance of the Boers. He was, however, at last successful, and retiring slowly to cover Webb's retreat, was able to get him safely back to the party. Shortly before this, Sergeant Inglehart had shown great gallantry in dashing into the first spruit, which could only be reached in single file, and was still full of Boers hesitating whether to fly or fire. Had they been given time to rally, they must have destroyed the small party of British, as they outnumbered them by 4 to 1. Major Phipps Hornby, Sergeant Charles Parker, Gunner Isaac Lodge, Driver Horace Harry Glassack, Q Battery, RHA, 4 Victoria Crosses were awarded to members of Q Battery, Royal Horse Artillery, for gallantry displayed at Corn Spruit. As every man of the battery had displayed equally conspicuous courage, Lord Roberts decided to deal with the case under Rule 13 of the Warrant of the Order, and allotted 4 badges, 1 for officers, 1 for non-commissioned officers, and 2 for gunners and drivers. The circumstances in which Major Phipps Hornby was selected for the honour in the first class mentioned are set forth in the following extract from the London Gazette. On the occasion of the action at Corn Spruit on March 31, 1900, a British force, including 2 batteries of the Royal Horse Artillery, was retiring from Thabanchu towards Bloemfontein. The enemy had formed an ambush at Corn Spruit, and before their presence was discovered by the main body, had captured the greater portion of the baggage column and 5 out of the 6 guns of the leading battery. When the alarm was given, Q Battery, Royal Horse Artillery, was within 300 yards of the Spruit. Major Phipps Hornby, who commanded it, at once wheeled about and moved off at a gallop under a very heavy fire. 1 gun upset when a wheel horse was shot and had to be abandoned, together with a wagon, the horses of which were killed. The remainder of the battery reached a position close to some unfinished railway buildings and came into action 1150 yards from the Spruit, remaining in action until ordered to retire. When the order to retire was received, Major Phipps Hornby ordered the guns and their limbers to be run back by hand to where the teams of uninjured horses stood behind the unfinished buildings. The few remaining gunners, assisted by a number of officers and men of a party of mounted infantry, and directed by Major Phipps Hornby and Captain Humphreys, the only remaining officers of the battery, succeeded in running back 4 of the guns under shelter. 1 or 2 of the limbers were similarly withdrawn by hand, but the work was most severe and the distance considerable. In consequence, all concerned were so exhausted that they were unable to drag in the remaining limbers or the 5th gun. It now became necessary to risk the horses, and volunteers were called for from among the drivers, who readily responded. Several horses were killed and men wounded, but at length only 1 gun and 1 limber were left exposed. 4 separate attempts were made to rescue these, but when no more horses were available, the attempt had to be given up, and the gun and limber were abandoned. Meanwhile, the other guns had been sent on, 1 at a time, and after passing within 700 or 800 yards of the enemy, in rounding the head of a donga and crossing 2 spruits, they eventually reached a place of safety, where the battery was reformed. After full consideration of the circumstances of the case, the Field Marshal Commanding-in-Chief in South Africa formed the opinion that the conduct of all ranks of Q Battery, Royal Horse Artillery, was conspicuously gallant and daring, but that all were equally brave and devoted in their behavior. He therefore decided to treat the case of the battery as one of collective gallantry under Rule 13 of the Victoria Cross Warrant, and directed that 1 officer should be selected for the decoration of the Victoria Cross by the officers, 1 non-commissioned officer by the non-commissioned officers, and 2 gunners or drivers by the gunners and drivers. A difficulty arose with regard to the officer, owing to the fact that there were only 2 unwounded officers, Major Phipps Hornby and Captain Humphreys, available for the work of saving the guns, and both of these had been conspicuous by their gallantry and by the fearless manner in which they exposed themselves, and each of them nominated the other for the decoration. It was ultimately decided in favor of Major Phipps Hornby, as having been the senior concerned. Sergeant Charles Parker was chosen by the non-commissioned officers as the one among them most deserving the distinction. Gunner Isaac Lodge and driver Horace Harry Glassock were selected in the like manner by the vote of their comrades. Lieutenant W. H. S. Nickerson, Royal Army Medical Corps, attached to mounted infantry. At Wakkerstroom, on the evening of the 20th April, during the advance of the infantry to support the mounted troops, Lieutenant Nickerson went, in the most gallant manner, under a heavy rifle and shell fire, to attend a wounded man, dressed his wounds, and remained with him till he had him conveyed to a place of safety. Corporal H. Beat, 1st Battalion Derbyshire Regiment, Mounted Infantry. At Wakkerstroom, on the 22nd April, No. 2 Mounted Infantry Company, 1st Battalion Derbyshire Regiment, with 2 squadrons Imperial Yeomanry, had to retire from near a farm under a ridge held by Boers. Corporal Burnett, Imperial Yeomanry, was left on the ground wounded, and Corporal Beat, on seeing him, remained behind and placed him under cover, bound up his wounds, and by firing prevented the Boers from coming down to the farm till dark, when Dr. Wilson, Imperial Yeomanry, came to the wounded man's assistance. The retirement was carried out under a very heavy fire, and Corporal Beat was exposed to fire during the whole afternoon. Captain Ernest Beckwith Toes, the Gordon Highlanders. On the 11th December, 1899, at the action of Majesfontein, Captain Toes was brought to notice by his commanding officer for his gallantry and devotion in assisting the late Colonel Downman, when mortally wounded in the retirement, and endeavoring, when close up to the front of the firing line, to carry Colonel Downman on his back. But finding this not possible, Captain Toes supported him till joined by Colour Sergeant Nelson and Lance Corporal Hodgson. On the 30th of April, 1900, Captain Toes, with 12 men, took up a position on the top of Mount Thaba, far away from support. A force of about 150 Boers attempted to seize the same plateau, neither party appearing to see the other until they were but 100 yards apart. Some of the Boers then got within 40 yards of Captain Toes and his party and called on him to surrender. He at once caused his men to open fire and remained firing himself until severely wounded, both eyes shattered, succeeding in driving off the Boers. The gallantry of this officer in vigorously attacking the enemy, for he not only fired, but charged forward, saved the situation, notwithstanding the numerical superiority of the Boers. Corporal F-1000K, the Gordon Highlanders. On the 29th of May 1900, during the action on Crow's Nest Hill near Johannesburg, Corporal 1000K repeatedly rushed forward, under a withering fire at short ranges, to attend to wounded comrades, dressing their wounds, while he himself was without shelter, and in one instance carrying a wounded man from the open, under a heavy fire, to the shelter of a boulder. Corporal F. Kirby, Royal Engineers. On the morning of June 2, 1900, a party sent to try to cut the Delagoa Bay Railway were retiring, hotly pressed by very superior numbers. During one of the successive retirements of the rearguard, a man, whose horse had been shot, was seen running after his comrades. He was a long way behind the rest of his troop, and was under a brisk fire. From among the retiring troop, Corporal Kirby turned and rode back to the man's assistance. Although by the time he reached him, they were under a heavy fire at close range, Corporal Kirby managed to get the dismounted man up behind him and to take him clear off over the next rise held by our rearguard. This is the third occasion on which Corporal Kirby has displayed gallantry in the face of the enemy. Private C. Ward, 2nd Battalion, the King's Own Yorkshire Light Infantry. On June 26, 1900, at Lindley, a picket of the Yorkshire Light Infantry was surrounded on three sides by about 500 Boers at close quarters. The two officers were wounded, and all but 6 of their men were killed or wounded. Private Ward then volunteered to take a message asking for reinforcements to the signalling station about 150 yards in the rear of the post. His offer was at first refused, owing to the practical certainty of his being shot, but on his insisting, he was allowed to go. He got across untouched through a storm of shots from each flank, and having delivered his message, he voluntarily returned from a place of absolute safety and recrossed the fire-swept ground to assure his commanding officer that the message had been sent. On this occasion, he was severely wounded, but for this gallant action, the post would certainly have been captured. Sergeant Arthur Herbert Lindsay Richardson of Lord Strathcona's Corps. On July 5, at Wolves Spruit, about 15 miles north of Standerton, a party of Lord Strathcona's Corps, only 38 in number, came into contact and was engaged at close quarters with a force of 80 of the enemy. When the order to retire had been given, Sergeant Richardson rode back under a very heavy crossfire and picked up a trooper whose horse had been shot and who was wounded in 2 places and rode with him out of fire. At the time when this act of gallantry was performed, Sergeant Richardson was within 300 yards of the enemy and was himself riding a wounded horse. Captain William Ingleson Gordon, the Gordon Highlanders. On July 11, 1900, during the action near Leeuwenhoek or Dornbuschfontein, near Krugerstorp, a party of men, accompanied by Captains Younger and Allen, having succeeded in dragging an artillery wagon under cover when its horses were unable to do so by reason of the heavy and accurate fire of the enemy, Captain Gordon called for volunteers to go out with him to try to bring in one of the guns. He went out alone to the nearest gun under a heavy fire, and with the greatest coolness fastened a drag rope to the gun and then beckoned to the men, who immediately doubled out to join him in accordance with his previous instructions. While moving the gun, Captain Younger and 3 men were hit. Seeing that further attempts would only result in further casualties, Captain Gordon ordered the remainder of the party under cover of the kopje again, and having seen the wounded safely away, himself retired. Captain Gordon's conduct, under a particularly heavy and most accurate fire at only 850 yards range, was most admirable, and his manner of handling his men most masterly. His devotion on every occasion that his battalion has been under fire has been remarkable. Captain David Reginald Younger, the Gordon Highlanders, in recognition of the conspicuous bravery displayed by him on July 11, 1900, as described above, would have received the Victoria Cross had he survived his gallant action. Sergeant T. Lawrence, 17th Lancers. On the 7th August 1900, when on patrol duty near Essenbosch Farm, Sergeant Lawrence and a Private Hayman were attacked by 12 or 14 Boers. Private Hayman's horse was shot, and the man was thrown, dislocating his shoulder. Sergeant Lawrence at once came to his assistance, extricated him from under the horse, put him on his own horse, and sent him on to the picket. Sergeant Lawrence took the soldier's carbine, and with his own carbine as well, kept the Boers off until Private Hayman was safely out of range. He then retired for some 2 miles on foot, followed by the Boers, and keeping them off till assistance arrived. Corporal H.J. Knight, 1st Battalion Liverpool Regiment, No. 1 Company, 4th Division Mounted Infantry. On the 21st August 1900, during the operations near Van Wyksvele, Corporal Knight was posted in some rocks, with 4 men covering the right rear of a detachment of the same company who, under Captain Ewart, were holding the right of the line. The enemy, about 50 strong, attacked Captain Ewart's right and almost surrounded, at short range, Corporal Knight's small party. That non-commissioned officer held his ground, directing his party to retire one by one to better cover, where he maintained his position for nearly an hour, covering the withdrawal of Captain Ewart's force and losing 2 of his 4 men. He then retired, bringing with him 2 wounded men. One of these he left in a place of safety, the other he carried himself for nearly 2 miles. The party were hotly engaged during the whole time. Private William Heaton, 1st Battalion the King S. Liverpool Regiment. On the 23rd August 1900, the company to which Private Heaton belonged, advancing in front of the general line held by the troops, became surrounded by the enemy and was suffering severely. At the request of the officer commanding, Private Heaton volunteered to take a message back to explain the position of the company. He was successful, though at the imminent risk of his own life. Had it not been for Private Heaton's courage, there can be little doubt that the remainder of the company, which suffered very severely, would have had to surrender. Lieutenant Guy G. E. Willey, Tasmanian Imperial Bushman. On the 1st of September 1900, near Warm Bad, Lieutenant Willey was with the advance scouts of a foraging party. They were passing through a narrow gorge, very rocky and thickly wooded, when the enemy in force suddenly opened fire at short range from hidden cover, wounding 6 out of the party of 8, including Lieutenant Willey. That officer, seeing that one of his men was badly wounded in the leg, and that his horse was shot, went back to the man's assistance, made him take his, Lieutenant Willey's, horse, and opened fire from behind a rock to cover the retreat of the others, at the imminent risk of being cut off himself. Colonel T. E. Hickman, DSO, considers that the gallant conduct of Lieutenant Willey saved Corporal Brown from being killed or captured, and that his subsequent action in firing to cover the retreat was instrumental in saving others of his men from death or capture. Private J. H. Bisbee, Tasmanian Imperial Bushman, act of courage for which recommended. On September 1, 1900, Private Bisbee was one of an advanced scouting party passing through a rocky defile near Warm Bad, Transvaal. The enemy, who were in ambuscade, opened a sudden fire at close range, and 6 out of the party of 8 were hit, including 2 officers. The horse of one of the wounded officers broke away and bolted. Private Bisbee gave the officer his stirrup leather to help him out of action, but finding that the officer was too badly wounded to go on, Private Bisbee dismounted, placed him on his horse, mounted behind him, and conveyed him out of range. This act was performed under a very hot fire and in a very exposed place. Major E. D. Brown, 14th Hussars. On the 13th October 1900, at Jelluck, when the enemy were within 400 yards, and bringing a heavy fire to bear, Major Brown, seeing that Sergeant Hersey's horse was shot, stopped behind the last squadron as it was retiring, and helped Sergeant Hersey to mount behind him, carrying him for about 3/4 of a mile to a place of safety. He did this under a heavy fire. Major Brown afterwards enabled Lieutenant Brown, 14th Hussars, to mount by holding his horse, which was very restive under the heavy fire. Lieutenant Brown could not otherwise have mounted. Subsequently, Major Brown carried Lance Corporal Trumpeter Lee out of action. Lieutenant A. C. Doxat, 3rd Battalion Imperial Yeomanry. On the 20th October 1900, near Zeerust, Lieutenant Doxat proceeded with a party of mounted infantry to reconnoiter a position held by 100 Boers on a ridge of koppies. When within 300 yards of the position, the enemy opened a heavy fire on Lieutenant Doxat's party, which then retired, leaving one of their number who had lost his horse. Lieutenant Doxat, seeing the dangerous position in which the man was placed, galloped back under a very heavy fire and brought him on his horse to a place of safety. Sergeant Farmer, Cameron Highlanders. During the attack on General Clement's camp at Nuitgedacht on December 13, 1900, Lieutenant Sandilands, Cameron Highlanders, with 15 men, went to the assistance of a picket which was heavily engaged, most of the men having been killed or wounded. The enemy, who were hidden by trees, opened fire on the party at a range of about 20 yards, killing 2 and wounding 5, including Lieutenant Sandilands. Sergeant Farmer at once went to the officer, who was perfectly helpless, and carried him away under a very heavy and close fire to a place of comparative safety, after which he returned to the firing line and was eventually taken prisoner. Lexicon of terms and places connected with the campaign. Accoutrements, the belts which support the arms, pouch, or pouches of a soldier. These belts are usually made of buff leather in the English army and are marked inside, as are also the pouches, and C, with the number of the regiment to which they belong. Adjutant, an officer not above the rank of major, appointed to assist the commanding officer in all the details of duty and discipline, receives and issues that officer's orders to the regiment in general, and is bound to bring to his notice all infraction of rules and orders. He is responsible for the correctness of the regimental books. He prosecutes on all court-martials, supervises the sergeant's mess, has charge of the orderly room, colonel's office, inspects all escorts and guards, has charge of the official correspondence, and has to spend much of his time in drilling recruits and in all duties tending to discipline and the smartness and efficiency of the regiment. Adjutant General, one of the chief staff officers of the army, through whom all orders are promulgated and to whom all reports are sent for the information of the Commander-in-Chief. In time of peace, all official correspondence passes through his office, and he is responsible for the general efficiency of the army. On a campaign, in subordination to the Chief of the Staff, he regulates the daily duties of the force. He keeps an exact account of each division and brigade, with a roll of the general and field officers. He issues the orders of the day, and communications on the field are made to him in the absence of a chief of the staff. To his department are attached deputy adjutant generals, assistant adjutant generals, and deputy assistant adjutant generals. Advanced posts, a term applied to pickets and any fortified position in country or village in advance of the main line of battle. Their object is to prevent the enemy surprising the main body of the army and to give it time to form up. This being done, the advanced posts fall back upon their supports and join the main force. Afrikander, a white man born of European parents in South Africa. Afrikander Bond, an association to protect the interests of the Afrikanders in Africa, now known as the Dutch Party in Cape Colony, who were certainly not wholly loyal. Aide-de-camp, an officer attached to the personal staff of a general officer in garrison or in the field. He carries all orders given him by the general. These he must deliver most distinctly so as to avoid all chance of mistake, and it is understood his orders must be implicitly obeyed. Thus only officers of intelligence and smartness are appointed. In times of peace, the aide-de-camp assists his chief in official correspondence, in introducing officers, and in dispensing the courtesies of the general's house. An officer cannot be appointed until he has served 2 years with his regiment and passed the prescribed examination. The number of aide-de-camps allotted to general officers in the field are Commander-in-Chief, 4, Generals of Division, 2, General of Brigade, 1. In time of peace, a general has 3 only. Aide-de-camps receive extra pay in addition to the pay of their regimental rank, which rank is seldom above that of captain. Aide-de-camps are attached to the sovereign, the appointment carrying with it the rank of colonel in the army. Governors of provinces also have them. Aliwal North, a town on the Orange River, on the border between the Free State and Cape Colony, where the Freer Bridge, 860 ft. in length, crosses the river. It had a population a little over 2,000, and with its park, racecourse, golf links, and sulphur springs, acted as the Leamington of Cape Colony. Ambulance, a 4-wheeled covered wagon for the conveyance of sick and wounded soldiers. 2 stretchers, the legs of which have small iron wheels, can be run into it. 3 men can sit on the tailboard, which lets down to serve as a footrest, and 3 others on a like seat in front. Buckets hang below the wagon, a barrel of water is fastened to the splinter bar, and from the high canvas roof depends a basket for the men's arms and valises. This roof is marked with the Geneva Cross. Amnesty, an act of forgiveness for offenses committed against the state, these offenses being usually of a political nature. Ammunition, a term applied to charges of powder for ordnance and small arms, also to all kinds of projectiles, and to various appliances for igniting the charges, and see during a campaign the reserve ammunition for small arms is carried in carts, each containing 9,600 rounds, under the charge of the officers commanding battalions, 3 carts to each battalion. The remainder of the reserve ammunition, gun and small arm is with the ammunition column. Ambush or ambuscade, troops, in small or large bodies, placed in concealment in order to surprise and attack an enemy. Approaches, all works are generally so called that are carried on towards a besieged place, such as trenches, saps, galleries, redoubts, lodgements, and places of arms. Armistice, a truce or suspension of hostilities between 2 armies, a stated time being given for its duration, at the expiration of which, if the contending nations do not come to an agreement, hostilities begin again. Armored train, a train, the carriages of which are externally plated with metal and loopholed to admit of soldiers firing, while they themselves are protected. Arms, weapons of different forms for attack and defense in the various branches of the army. Army Corps, a small army under the command of a general, composed of all arms of the service and furnished with every requisite for active service. Its war strength in the British Army is about 40,000 officers and men, 12,846 horses, 122 guns, 25 machine guns, and carts and wagons. Army Ordnance Corps. Its duties consist in issuing stores and munitions of war and are most onerous. Army Reserve, a force composed of men who have enlisted for 12 years, a portion of which service, viz., 7 or 8 and not less than 3 years, must be passed with the colors, the residue being spent in the reserve. These are known as short service men. Other soldiers eligible to enter the reserve force are those who have exceeded their first term of service, men of say 13 or 14 years service, and are yet under 34 years of age. Artillery. Horse artillery consists of men mounted on horses or on the limbers of the guns. They are armed with 12-pounders and maneuver with cavalry. Field artillery moves more slowly, the men being carried on guns and wagons. Garrison or siege artillery furnishes gunners and heavy guns of position drawn by horses, bullocks, and in India, elephants. There are now 28 horse batteries, 151 field batteries, and of the mountain division of garrison artillery. Badge, an honorary distinction worn on the colors of a regiment. According to the Queen's regulations, all regimental badges granted under special authority to different corps are to be strictly preserved. Baggage, in a military sense, includes clothes, camp equipage, and cooking apparatus of a regiment or army. The baggage of troops, if proceeding by sea, is divided into light and heavy baggage. Balloon, useful in warfare for purposes of reconnoitering, also in cases of a beleaguered city of keeping up communications with the outside world. The Prussians reconnoitered the French position before Metz in 1870 by means of a balloon with telegraph attached, and thus the survey of the position of the French army was instantaneously conveyed to General von Moltke. Bandoliers, belts of leather or canvas to hold small-arm cartridges worn over the shoulder. Base of operations, in military language, represents the original line on which an offensive army forms, whether it be the frontier of a country, river, or safe position, whence it takes the field to invade an enemy's country. The base of operations, in case of retreat, is always kept open to fall back upon. Battalion and infantry unit. A British battalion is composed of 10 of all ranks and 1 machine gun. It is usually constituted thus: lieutenant colonel in command, majors 4, captains 5, lieutenants, 1st and 2nd, 16. Battery signifies first, generally guns grouped and in position for action. Second, the unit of an artillery command, as a battalion of infantry or a squadron of cavalry. Thirdly, any work, permanent or temporary, considered as a position for a group of guns. Bayonet, a short sword or triangular-shaped dagger fixed onto the muzzle of a rifle, which, in this position, gives the soldier increased means of offense and defense. The name is derived from Bayonne in France, where it was supposed to have been first invented. Originally, the bayonet was a blade of steel attached to a helve of wood, which was thrust into the barrel, but this arrangement interfered with the loading and firing of the weapon, and to remedy this defect, an elbow and socket were constructed, and the result was the present mode of attaching the bayonet. This improvement took place about the 17th century. The first regiment, which appears to have had the bayonet attached to its musket, was the Grenadier Guards in 1693. Macaulay attributes the loss by the English of the Battle of Killiecrankie to the then awkward mode of attaching the bayonet, as the Highlanders were upon the troops before they could convert their firelocks into pikes. The older form of bayonet was 22 inches long and weighed nearly a pound. The modern bayonet is about 12 inches in length and weighs 15 ounces. Beaconsfield, a suburb of Kimberley, containing several hotels, municipal offices, courthouse, tramways, and sea population about 10,000, half of whom are whites. Bearer Company, Company of Royal Army Medical Corps for the removal of the wounded from the field of action to the dressing station or hospital. Bechuanaland, a protectorate containing the territories of various native chiefs. The Crown Colony of British Bechuanaland was annexed to Cape Colony, November 1895. It is bounded on the north by the Matopo River, beyond which is the country known as the British Protectorate. Belmont, a station on the railway from Cape Town to Kimberley, 591 miles from the former and about 54 miles from the latter. Berg, a mountain or high hill. Biltong, strips of meat dried in the sun. It is much used by the Boers in wartime, as it is very portable and can be kept for an almost unlimited period. Bivouac, from bis, double, and the German word wasch, a guard. An army is said to bivouac when it does not encamp at night and sleeps in the open. This form of resting has the advantage over tents, as it does not enable the enemy to form any conception of the strength of his adversary. Black Watch, the 42nd Regiment of the Line, known as one of the most distinguished corps in the British Army. In Chambers's Encyclopedia is found the following: Black Watch, the appellation given to certain armed companies employed to watch the Highlands of Scotland. The term black arose from the dress of this species of militia being composed of tartans of dark colors. Some Highlanders had been armed by government as early as 1725, when General Wade was appointed Commander-in-Chief in Scotland, but it was not till about 1729 or 1730 that the companies assumed a regular form. They were stationed originally in different parts of the Highlands, and acting independently of each other, were styled the independent companies of the Black Watch. Subsequently, after being of great use for local purposes, the companies united were formed into the 42nd Regiment under the command of the Earl of Crawford in 1739. Bloemfontein, the capital of the Orange Free State, on the railway line between Cape Town and Pretoria, 750 miles from the former and from the latter town. Population about 7,000 white, 3,000 black inhabitants. It is a picturesque, cleanly, and prosperous town. 3 English newspapers are published there, and it is much frequented by the English, by whom the fine climate is much esteemed. Boers, the Dutch word for farmers. For early history and character see Val. I. Bomb-proof buildings. Buildings formed so as to withstand the shock of heavy shot or shell falling on them. Boschveld, plain covered with bush or scrub. Boshoff is 72 miles northwest of Bloemfontein and about 40 northeast of Kimberley. From Boshoff to the nearest point of the Vaal River, near Warrenton or 14 Streams, is about 25 miles. Brigade, a body of troops, the unit of a division. An infantry brigade is composed of 4 battalions. The term brigade is given to the Brigade of Guards, which consists of 4 regiments of foot guards, to the household cavalry, composed of 2 regiments of life guards, and the Royal Horse Guards. Brigade Major takes the same place in relation to a brigade as an adjutant in relation to a regiment. Brigadier, a military officer whose rank is next above a colonel. He exercises the command of a brigade of troops with the rank, on active service, of Major General. Bulawayo, the place of killing, the capital of Rhodesia, white population 4,000, a thriving, well-built town with every modern convenience. It boasts many large hotels and churches, 2 theaters, a racecourse, and several schools. Electric light, newspapers, and a splendid avenue of trees, 25-40 yards long and feet broad, speak of the march of civilization and bear the impress of the finger of Mr. Rhodes. A statue, characteristically colossal, of the empire maker has been executed by Mr. John Tweed for erection on the scene of his life labors. See Vol. IP 124. Burg, a town. Burger, European male inhabitant of the republics who may have obtained the franchise. For particulars regarding the Uitlanders and the franchise, see Mr. Loveday's speech, 1895, Vol. IP 146. Camp, the extent of ground occupied by an army either in huts or under canvas. They are placed, as a general rule, where wood and water are easily accessible. In standing camps, the regulated interval is 10 paces between each tent. Campaign, the period during which an army keeps the field and carries on a series of operations. Canteen, a regulated establishment, otherwise a store, managed for the benefit of the men by a committee of officers, for the purpose of supplying liquor, groceries, and to the soldier at reasonable prices. Cape boys, colored people, the offspring of intermarriage between mixed races and Negroes. Cape Colony, bounded by the Orange River and Orange Colony on the north, by Natal on the northeast, and by the Atlantic and Indian Oceans on the west, south, and southeast. Area about 277,150 miles. Population in 1896, exclusive of Pondoland and British Bechuanaland, about 1,822,000, 1/5 of whom are whites. The climate is highly esteemed and is said by some to have upon the constitution the effect of champagne. It is highly recommended for those suffering from pulmonary complaints, and as the seasons are exactly the reverse of those in England, health travelers to South Africa can escape the rigors of the British winter entirely. The defense of the Cape Colony has hitherto been maintained by a small British fleet, and by a small British garrison supplemented by the admirable corps of volunteers, whose services in the present need have been so zealously placed at the service of the Empire. For details, see Vol. Roman 3, p. 161. The imports in 1898 stood thus: Cape Town, £5,128,292, Port Elizabeth, £6,246,429, East London, £3,519,697. The exports were: Cape Town, £15,881,952, Port Elizabeth, £2,103,351, East London, £954,654. Cape Town, population over 50,000 before the war, distance from Southampton 5978 miles. A flourishing, well-built and ordered town, boasting 18 miles of tramway lines. The water supply is good, but owing to bad drainage, the death rate in hot weather is about 27 per 1,000. Captain in the army, an officer who commands a troop of horse or a company of infantry. The badges of rank are 2 stars on each shoulder strap. In the Navy, a captain commands a cruiser or a battleship. He ranks with a lieutenant colonel in the army, and after 3 years' service with a full colonel. Carbine, a small-arm rifle used by the cavalry, shorter and lighter than that of the infantry. Cavalry, mounted branch of the army, divided into heavy and light. The duties of cavalry are extensive and comprise the care of reconnoitering parties, outpost duties, feelers in advance of an army. Cavalry is classed as heavy, medium, and light. The household cavalry and 2 regiments of dragoons are heavy. All other dragoons and dragoon guards are medium, and hussar regiments light. The whole carry carbines and swords, or carbines and swords and lances. Every regiment is divided into 3 or 4 squadrons, which are each divided into 2 troops. General de Brack, in remarking on the qualifications of the cavalry officer, said, "To be a good officer of advance guard, it is not enough to be brave and to command well under fire. It is necessary to have brought there the greatest possible number of men, and in the best condition to act with effect. The habit of judging of the health of men and horses, a knowledge of prompt remedies applicable in particular cases, the daily and minute inspection of appointments, understanding the necessary and judicious modes of repairing the same, the providing of all that can be useful to the soldier and his horse without overloading the latter, the equipment well arranged, regularity of pace in the line of march, good situation for the bivouacs, with constant attention to everything which can contribute to a horse's ability even to dispense for a time with the farrier, a notion of the method of using the utensils contained in a soldier's case, understanding the occasions favorable to refreshment and repose, the moral acquaintance with men under his command, discipline preserved when the dragoons have no longer before their eyes the dread of the guardroom or jail, that foresight which ever watches to prevent useless distress to the horses, personal example offered upon every occasion and afforded the more readily in proportion as those occasions may be trying or difficult, confidence, unbounded devotion, the power of exciting enthusiasm among his followers. These are capabilities the theories of peace cannot teach. These are what, in addition to courage, military coup d'oeil, and a ready judgment on the field of battle, form the officer of real distinction. This quotation serves to enhance our appreciation of the real distinction of the British cavalry leaders who relieved Kimberley and Mafeking. Charlestown, situated north of Natal, a few miles from Majuba Hill. Colenso, small village in Natal near the Tugela River. Colesburg, small town 37 miles beyond Nauput, population 1830. Colonel, highest rank in the army below that of general. Their rank is denoted by 2 stars and a crown on each shoulder strap. A lieutenant colonel wears a crown and 1 star. Colonel of a regiment, a general officer placed at the head of a regiment as reward of long and meritorious services, an honorary distinction merely. The Prince of Wales is colonel of the 10th Hussars. Column, formation of troops several ranks in depth and of any length of front, disposed so as to move in regular succession. Sometimes the name column is given to a body of troops, which is in effect a small army. Combatant, as distinct from non-combatant officers such as chaplains and surgeons. Commandant, the chief of the Boer commando. Commandeer, to call out on service. Commander, naval officer ranking next below a captain. He receives the title of captain socially and ranks with a colonel in the army. Commander-in-chief, highest staff appointment in the army. He acts in conjunction with the Secretary of War. There is a local commander-in-chief over the Indian forces and also over those in Ireland. All these officers in their different posts supervise the training, discipline, and appointments and of the army. Commando, an irregular regiment of mounted Boers. Commissariat, an organization responsible for collecting food, forage, and necessaries for troops in cantonments or in the field. The duties, divided into 1 transport, 2 supply, are carried out by the Army Service Corps. The difficulties of securing and carrying food in an enemy's country are very great. Owing to this difficulty, the First Crusade never got beyond Hungary. In the Ashanti War, the Fantis were so afraid of the Ashantis that they refused to carry the food or baggage of the army, and the duty devolved on the West India regiments. Commission, warrant signed by the sovereign authorizing the officer to exercise command in the army. The purchase of commissions was abolished in 1871. They are now given to candidates after passing the prescribed examination before the civil service examiners, when they are sent to Sandhurst or Woolwich academies for further instruction, chiefly of military nature. Quantities of irregulars and volunteers have now been given commissions as reward for practical service in the field. Communications, the lines by which an army communicates with its base from any point to which it has advanced, and by which it must retreat in the event of disaster. They are the arteries that vitalize the mechanism and allow it to work. Company, a body of men commanded by a captain and forming the first unit of an infantry battalion. The number of a company may be reckoned as about 100. About 8 companies make a battalion. Durban, Natal. Photo by Wilson, Aberdeen. Contraband of war. Arms, ammunition, coal, food, and sea, which a neutral power is prohibited by the law of nations from carrying to countries in a state of war. Cordite, smokeless powder resembling cords, which defies the best efforts to locate the enemy, invented by Sir F. Abel and Professor Dewar. Corporal, next grade below that of sergeant. Crusaut gun. The famous long toms of the Boers are Crusaut guns. They were originally named after the place of Le Crusaut, where the firm of Schneider & Co. manufacture these weapons, but the term is now applied to other guns made by the same firm. De Aar, important junction of the Cape Town and Port Elizabeth railways. Division, first unit of a corps army and commanded by a general officer, consists of 2 or more brigades and is composed of 3 arms of the service, infantry, cavalry, and artillery. Donga, river bed with high banks on either side, generally dry save in the rainy season. Dorp, a hamlet. Dundee, town in Natal, north of Ladysmith, noted for its coal fields, which are the best in Africa. They produced about 1,000 tons a day before the war. The locality is rich in iron, and the future of this now historic region promises to be commercially rosy. Durban, flourishing port of Natal, population about 39,245, of which over 17,700 are whites. It is 29 hours' journey by rail from Pretoria and miles by sea from Southampton. It has several good hotels, restaurants, and clubs, and 2 daily newspapers are published there. Trams and electric lights form part of the attractions of the town. Earthworks, in fortification, all works thrown up for attack or defense in which earth enters chiefly into the construction. It is a question whether, in the defense of a place, earth be preferable to masonry. In the latter case, the defenders are liable to be injured by splinters, while in the former, repairs are more readily effected. The reason why the capture of the mainland during the Crimean War was so hard a task is attributed to the fact that repairs were very easily accomplished during the night. Elandslaagte, the glen of the Eland, small and now ever memorable village near Ladysmith, see Val, Roman II, p. 20. Engineers. The duties of this branch are so numerous, it is almost impossible to define them. They are required to be jack of all trades and masters of each. The construction of works and bridges and of military buildings, the planning and direction of the attack and defense of a fortification, and 1,001 other duties fall to their lot. The following lines by Rudyard Kipling form a summary of the sappers' accomplishments. We lay down their sidings and help 'em in train. And we sweep up their mess through the bloomin' campaign. They send us in front with a fuse and a mine to blow up the gates that are rushed by the line. They send us behind with a pick and a spade to dig for the guns of a bullock brigade. Now the line S, but a man with a gun in his hand. And cavalry's only what horses can stand. Artillery moves by the leave o' the ground. But we are the men that do something all round. For we are Her Majesty's Royal Engineers, with the rank and pay of a sapper. Epaulement, an earthwork thrown up to conceal and protect guns and gunners from the fire of the enemy. Esprit de corps. It is described in James' Military Dictionary as the feeling of attachment a soldier has for his regiment, even to the point of thinking it the best in the army. It fosters goodwill and fellowship among officers and soldiers. It produces an emulous thirst after military glory. In fact, true esprit de corps creates such a feeling of enthusiasm and love for all that is honorable and noble, that an officer or soldier will be careful in his conduct to do nothing which would bring dishonor or reproach on his regiment. Estcourt, important trading town in Natal, situated near the junction of the Bushmans and the Little Bushmans River. It is the seat of magistracy for Weenan County. Population 300. It possesses 2 hotels, a church, and a library. The climate is considered one of the finest in Natal. Facings. Regiments are distinguished by the color of their facings, otherwise by the color of the cuffs and collar of their regimentals. Feint, a mock attack to deceive the enemy as to the real direction of the assault. Field cornet, a Boer sub-magistrate of a district. Field marshal, highest military rank a general can obtain. Field officer, one below the rank of general and above that of captain. Majors, lieutenant, colonels or colonels of brevet or regimental rank are field officers. Flag of truce. Flag, generally a white handkerchief attached to a staff and carried by an officer sent to communicate with the enemy. Flank attack, one of the modes of attack whereby the side or flank of an army is attacked. Flank movement, a change of march in course of a battle with a view to turning either one or both wings of the enemy. General, the name designates his command as having the general or highest orders to give in battle. There are 3 grades: general, lieutenant general, and major general. Brigadier general is the title given to an officer while in command of a brigade. Glencoe Talana Hill, a now notable little town, NE of Ladysmith. Guards. The guards compose the household brigade. This consists of 1st Anne Life Guards, red, the Royal Horse Guards, blue, the Grenadier Guards, the Coldstream Guards, the Scots Guards, and the Irish Guards. The Life Guards greatly distinguished themselves at Waterloo. The Horse Guards, Oxford Blues, took part in the campaigns of both Marlborough and Wellington. The Grenadier Guards is the senior regiment of infantry in the army, the devoted royalists clinging to Charles Roman II. In 1656, formed the first nucleus of this gallant regiment. The Coldstreams were raised in 1660 by General Monk, when Parliament consented to give a brigade of guards to Charles Roman II. The splendid work done by the guards in the present war speaks for itself. Gun, the modern word for cannon of all kinds. Gunner, a private in the Royal Artillery. The duties of the gunner are manifold. He has to be instructed in drill and in the services of the various natures of ordnance, heavy and light, to be acquainted with ammunition, mode of using it, and caution required in dealing with it. In other days, few gunners were attached to either train or battery, only 1 per gun, assisted by a matros. The duties of a matros were only in some ways similar to those of the present gunner. The men belonged to a class termed artificers and were engaged more for the usefulness of their trade than for the knowledge of artillery. With the increase of guns came the increase of gunners, and the mere artificer was superseded, and the gunner became the handy, well-instructed, yet dashing man he has proved himself to be. Harrismith, situated near the Natal border in the Orange Free State, an important trading center and a highly approved health resort. Population, mostly British, 1,700. Heidelberg, town on the raw miles south of Pretoria. Population about 2,500. Heliograph, an apparatus invented by Mr. H.C. Mance for telegraphing by means of the sun's rays reflected from mirrors. The mirror, generally of steel, mounted on a stand, is movable so that its reflections flash in given figures across the sky. The process has been adapted to the Morse system of dots and dashes, and messages have been successfully carried over a distance of 150 miles. The signal can be read in ordinary weather without telescopes up to 50 miles. Helmet, a headdress of light cork or wicker generally covered with khaki to protect the troops from the sun. It is the universal headdress for officers and men in India. Honorable Artillery Company, a volunteer force, the oldest military body in England. Horse Artillery, mounted branch of the British service. On account of its mobility, it acts with cavalry. Field artillery is also a mounted branch. Hospital military, they are of 3 kinds, general, field, and convalescent. Cases of infectious nature are sent to a general hospital, specially appointed for their reception. Field hospitals are temporary establishments for the care of sick and wounded in the vicinity of the field of battle. Serious cases, when practicable, are sent off to the nearest general hospital in the rear. Convalescent hospitals describe themselves. Hospital ships. They serve either as stationary hospitals or, if sick accumulate, can sail home or to the nearest station, discharge, and return to fill again. One of these, the Maine, was organized by Lady Randolph Churchill and proved invaluable. Howitzer, short siege gun throwing lyddite shells at a high angle so that they can descend upon a fortress or besieged town. They have a range of over 8,000 yards. There are also field howitzers. Hussars, light cavalry, derived from the Hungarian Huss, 20 and R pay, because every 20 houses had to provide one horse soldier. Imperial light horse, see Val, Roman 3, p. 165. Infantry, foot soldiers. The words derived from the Spanish soldiery of the Infanta, and the term infanteria was applied to them, in consequence of their being the troops of the Infanta of Spain. The British infantry was declared by Marshal Soult the finest in the world. There are 109 infantry regiments in the British Army. The oldest of these, formed between 1660 and, are the Guards, the 2nd Queen S, raised for the defence of Tangiers, and the 3rd Buffs, the old London train bands. Intelligence Department, a branch of the Quartermaster General's Department, which has for its object the collecting and sifting and arranging information useful to government or army in peace or war. Entrench or entrench, to secure a position or body of men against the attack of the enemy by digging a ditch or trench. Invest, to surround a place and prevent all communication with the outer country. Irregular troops, troops which do not belong to the regular forces. Until lately, there were no such troops in the British Army. Now it is almost impossible to enumerate them. In India, there are several irregular forces of cavalry and infantry for the protection of native states. Jack, the nation's pet name for a sailor, as Tommy is the pet name for a soldier. Jacobstal, small town in the Orange Free State. Jägersfontein, small town 60 miles southwest of Bloemfontein. In its valuable diamond mine have been found both the largest and the most perfect stones yet discovered. The largest specimen was brought to light in 1893, the most flawless one in 1895. Johannesburg, this important city extends over an area of 6 miles, its parks alone occupying an area of 84 acres. Rural population in 1896 was 48,331, of which 38,868 were whites. District population, 102,078, of which 50,907 were whites. Johannesburg was declared a municipality in 1896. Fine hotels, public buildings, churches, clubs, and theaters abound. There are 126 miles of road, and most of the streets are regularly laid out with several open squares at intervals. Cabs, trams, gym rickshaws, and omnibuses ply for hire. Electric lights brighten the streets, while public houses and low canteens innumerable, where the vilest and most poisonous liquor is sold, deface them. These, together with gambling hells and sea, contrive to make the place a sink of abomination equal to Chicago. The cost of living in Johannesburg is enormous. The board and lodging of a bachelor is estimated at about £8 per month. Clothing and food are said to be nearly 50% dearer than in Europe. 7 newspapers exist, 2 of which are published in Dutch. Johannesburg in 1886 was represented by some straggling shanties dotting the line of reef, now forming the Wemmer and Ferreira Company's ground. When the existence of the reef, till then unknown, was discovered, steps were taken to secure a more convenient locality, and as a result, the present township was laid out in the December of that year. The spot chosen was one of the bleakest and highest in the Transvaal, and land was of so small value for agricultural purposes that farms were known to change hands for the price of a team of oxen. In 1895, however, 2 stands in Commissioner Street sold for £22,000, and in 1897, one in Pritchard Street fetched £40,000. The reefs that have brought about the transformation run east and west of the city, a distance of about 130 miles, and all around the country is dotted with battery houses and other buildings connected with the working of the mines. Regarding the output, see Vol. IP 129. Karoo, Hottentot name for a dry place, but now denoting certain districts. Karki, a dust-colored material in wool or calico used for the uniforms of soldiers, in order to make them less distinguishable from a distance. Indian troops are always clothed in karki. Of late, every article used on service has been painted or dyed the same color, from guns, carriages, and scabbards to horses and the attire of the naval brigade. Kilt, a dress worn by Highlanders, consisting of a loose petticoat extending from waist to knees. It dates from the 7th century when the kilt was made of skins. Kit, a military term expressing the regimental necessaries of a soldier. Kimberley, a flourishing town whose existence dates from the year 1870, when diamonds were discovered on 2 farms, Du Joitspan and Bulsfontein, see Vol. IP 133. Since that date, the place has widened with astounding rapidity, growing gradually from a mining camp into a large, somewhat irregularly planned town full of corrugated iron buildings, dotted at intervals with edifices of more substantial nature. The principal public buildings are the High Court of Griqualand West, with its imposing clock tower, the adjacent post and telegraph offices in the market square, the public library, said to contain the best collection of books in South Africa, the Kimberley Club, the Masonic Temple, the hospital and the sanatorium on the Beaconsfield Road. There are hotels in plenty and churches of all denominations, also a fine park with recreation grounds and 2 pavilions. The climate is splendid, an ideal one for invalids. The population is about 28,718, of who 658 are of European extraction. Krupp gun, a breech-loading rifled gun, taking its name from the inventor. Kuruman, though the surrounding country is scarcely attractive, land is said to yield good pasturage, and water can be obtained by digging from 5 to 30 feet. The price of crown lands in Kuruman in 1896 was at the rate of 2,312 per morgen. Kloof, a ravine. Karp, a hill. Karpie, the diminutive of carp. Kraal, cattle fold. Kroonstad, an active little town situate miles from Cape Town, population about 2,000. It has several hotels, a charming climate, good fishing on the Walsh River, golf links, a club and several churches. A railway connecting the place with the coal mines at Groenfontein is shortly to be made. Superior coal has also been found some 45 miles off at Veerfontein, and near the town is the Lace Diamond Mine, which in 1899 produced about 1,500 carats a month. Krugerstorp, a small town situated 22 miles from Johannesburg, where on the 15th of December, a species of national pilgrimage to celebrate the victory over the Kaffirs in 1836 and over the British at Majuba in 1881 was made by the Boers. It is also notable as the place where Dr. Jameson and his band surrendered in 1896. It contains a monument to those who have fallen in the service of their country. Lager, a fortification usually formed by placing wagons lashed together in a circle and covering them with tangled thorn and scrub. It now signifies a camp. Ladysmith, this now historic town lies in a basin of the hills some 30 miles from the Drakensberg Range. Its population is about 4,500, exclusive of military. The climate is dry and bracing and highly recommended to those suffering from affection of the lungs. There are many churches, a public library, a town hall, courthouse, jail, and school. The town, which claims to be the 3rd in importance in Natal, derived its name from the wife of Sir Harry or Henry Smith, Governor of Cape Colony. See Vol. IP 11. Lancers, a regiment of cavalry armed with lances. This nature of cavalry was much appreciated by the great Napoleon, who placed great reliance on some Polish lancer regiments. Landdrost, stipendiary magistrate to collect the revenues of a district. Lee Metford, magazine rifle bearing the name of its inventors, Mr. Ley and Mr. Metford. Lieutenant, ranks next below a captain. The senior lieutenant takes command of a company in the event of accident to the captain. Lieutenant colonel ranks next below a colonel in the army. Lieutenant general ranks next below a general. Lifeguards, mounted bodyguard of the sovereign. These regiments distinguished themselves in the peninsula, at Waterloo, and in Egypt. They seldom leave this country, save on special occasions. Lourenço Marques, a Portuguese township in Delagoa Bay, situate miles from Southampton, with which it is connected by a service of steamers via Durban. Boats returning to Europe via the Suez Canal call here. The importance of Delagoa as a trading station and as a base of railway to the interior has long been recognized, and in 1887, Colonel 1000 Murdo, having obtained a concession from the Portuguese government in 1883, formed a company to connect Lourenço Marques with Comati put on the Transvaal frontier. This railway was confiscated by the Portuguese in June 24, 1889, compensation to the shareholders, as a result of arbitration which was placed in the hands of 3 Swiss jurists, having only recently been awarded. Lyddite, a very powerful explosive, the exact composition of which is a secret. The early experiments of lyddite were made at Lydd, a small town in Kent, from which it derives its name. Its effects are so deadly that the mere concussion of the displaced air particles serves to kill anyone who may be within 50 yards of the shell. Mafeking, this small but world-famous town, 870 miles from Cape Town, was considered as a gateway to Rhodesia, and standing as it does on the route to Mashonaland, between Bechuanaland and the Transvaal, its importance as a center for distribution is evident. The Malopo River and the Ramathlabama Spruit, a few miles north of the town, form the southern boundary of the Bechuanaland Protectorate. Major, the lowest rank of field officer. Being a field officer, he is mounted on all parades and going into action. To every infantry battalion there are 4, and to every squadron of cavalry 1. Major General, the lowest grade of general officers. A brigade in the army is properly a Major General's command. Majuba Hill, scene of the Boer triumph over Sir George Carley in 1881. Near this spot is the grave of the gallant general, and not far off are the burial places of Colonel Dean at Laing's Neck and the men who fell in their country's cause. It is 4 miles distant from Charlestown. Marines, a body of men under the control of the Admiralty for service in the Navy or on shore. They have been described as amphibious animals because they are equally at home on land or at sea. They form part of naval brigades landed for service on shore and cooperate with the sailors. The force consists of 2 branches, Royal Marine Artillery and the Royal Marine Light Infantry. They were first raised in 1664. A finer and more serviceable set of men it is difficult to find. Martial law. Martial law means no law at all. According to the Duke of Wellington, it represents the will of the general who commands the army. Proclamation of martial law cautions the inhabitants of the district concerned that in consequence of rebellion or other rising, the responsibility of superseding the jurisdiction of the ordinary tribunals for the protection of property and persons rests with the military authorities, who will act as they think expedient for the public safety. Mauser, a rifle sighted up to 2,200 yards, but capable of much longer range, of which the bullet leaves the muzzle at a speed of 2,300 feet per second. It weighs 3/4 of a pound less than the Lee Metford, and is much neater in appearance. The Mauser is a favorite rifle with the Boers, though its magazine is only capable of holding 5 cartridges, while that of the Lee Metford will accommodate 10. Maxim guns, guns of small bore weighing 59 pounds, sighted up to 2,500 yards. Mobilization, fitting an army for the field, bringing the units to war strength, and calling out the reserves. The success of a war depends largely on the rapidity with which armies can be got ready previous to their being concentrated on the threatened points, and thus enabled to take the aggressive. In the Swiss army, the whole organization is so completely carried forward in time of peace that at the outbreak of hostilities, the headquarters staff need do no more than telegraph the one word, mobilize. The rapidity with which foreign armies can be mobilized has been gradually increasing. In 1866, the Prussian armies 220,000 strong, reached the frontiers of Saxony and Silesia in a fortnight. In 1870, Germany took 9 days to mobilize, and 8 days more to send an army of 400,000 men and guns to the French frontier. Mounted infantry. Good shots of the infantry mounted and joined into separate companies. The Boers have taught us the value of mounted infantry, and in the near future, they will probably become a permanent arm of the British forces. Nauput, situated at the junction of the branch line to De Aar and the main line to Pietersburg via Bloemfontein and Pretoria. It is about 270 miles distant from Port Elizabeth. Nachtmaal, the communion service, held quarterly by the Boers who congregate from different parts to partake of it together. Natal, Terra Natalis, or Christmas Land, was so named by its discoverer, Vasco da Gama, on the 25th of December 1497. Population 900,000, a tenth of whom are whites. Natal became a British colony in 1843, and in 1856 was made independent of Cape Colony. The total area of New Natal is 35,000 square miles. Pietermaritzburg is the capital, and its most flourishing seaport is Durban. The climate is excellent and has been likened to that of Kashmir with a dash of English South down thrown in. It is called the Garden of South Africa, and its picturesqueness is generally commented on. Some declare the scenery to be reminiscent of Scotland, though on a larger scale. Perhaps this very likeness to their native land may have influenced the early British explorers to settle in the place, which from then till now has been everywhere redolent of the Scotsman. The names of Glencoe and Dundee bear witness to his early enterprise, and the railway system, so admirably managed, serves to show how energetically he has continued to make this region entirely his own. The revenue for 1898 was £2,121,034, the expenditure £1,923,978. The postal telegraph service acquired a profit of £36,767. Since 1897, Natal has supplied free of cost 12,000 tons of coal to the British Navy. Naval Brigade, a detachment of seamen, marines, and guns landed from men of war to assist the army ashore. A naval brigade did signal service in the siege of Sebastopol and earned 12 out of 62 Victoria Crosses presented to the British forces. In the Indian Mutiny and in the Zulu War they were again active, and several times in African campaigns the bluejacket has shown the desperate valor, fertility of resource, and versatility of accomplishments that have earned for him the nickname of the Handy Man. Neck, junction between two hills. Newcastle, population 1746. This small town, 80 miles north of Ladysmith, is noted for its coal. The place, situated at the foot of the Drakensberg Range, was used as the base of military operations in 1881. Non-commissioned officer. The title includes staff clerks, sergeants, corporals, and bombardiers. Above them in rank are sergeant majors and bandmasters, who are warrant officers. Non-coms are described as the backbone of the army, many of them, when their officers have been stricken down, having led the men to victory. See Vol, Roman 4, p. 104. Nordenfeldt gun, modern gun named after its maker. Nulla, an Indian term, the dry bed of a stream, like Donga. Objective, a technical military term signifying the aim or object of the military combinations and movements in the theater of war. Occupation, army of, an army that remains in possession of a newly acquired country, retaining it as a kind of hostage till peace is signed and the war indemnity paid. Armies of occupation are usually fed at the expense of the defeated nation. Operations military, general movements of armies in the field. They are of two kinds, strategical and tactical, the former undertaken before being within reach of the enemy, the latter being developed during the battle. Orange Free State, area about 50,000 square miles, bounded on the north by the Transvaal, the east by Natal and Basutoland, and on the south and west by Cape Colony. Population in 1898, 400,000, two-thirds of whom were blacks. Revenue, £799,757. Expenditure, £956,752. Postal service profit, £2,510. Telegraph service, £3,140. The place is rich in diamonds, gold, iron, saltpeter, and various other metals and minerals of less valuable description. Organization. The organization of an army is the duty of a general staff in time of peace, and should be so perfect in detail as not to break down in the eventuality of war. Owing to the unpreparedness and inferiority of France in the matter of organization, she was beaten by Germany in 1870. Parole. An officer in the hands of the enemy may be permitted to proceed to his country on parole, having promised not to take up arms against his captors till the war is over. Patrol. A party of men moving between the line of posts to keep one informed of the state of the other. Also a body of men told off for purposes of quelling disturbances, picking up stragglers, and c. Pickets. The real outposts of any body of troops are the pickets with their dependent small bodies, patrols, and vedettes. As a rule, 20 to 30 men is a reasonable strength for a picket. Pietermaritzburg, capital of Natal, population 20,155, consisting of 11,309 whites, 2,692 Indians, 6,151 natives. It possesses some fine buildings, hotels and churches, a theater, a museum, and a library. It boasts 3 newspapers and a lunatic asylum. Pietersburg, a gold-producing locality 240 miles northeast of Pretoria. Pigeons carrier, birds known as homing pigeons that supply the most simple and practical means of transmitting orders to a distance during military operations. Carrier pigeons are said to have been used by the ancient Roman navigators as a species of pigeon telegraph before the time of the CSRs. Pont, ferry over a river. Pontoon, flat-bottomed open boat like a punt, used by Royal Engineers for supporting temporary bridges by which troops can cross a river. Poort, funnel-shaped gap between mountains. Port Elizabeth, 839 miles by rail from Cape Town, is the second city of importance in Cape Colony. Population 25,325, of which 13,000 are of European origin. The town was named after the wife of Sir Ruthven Donkin, who there erected a pyramid to her memory. There are many hotels, churches, and libraries, and the general appearance of prosperity and modernity that pervades the place has caused it to be called the Liverpool of South Africa. Potchefstroom, the most ancient town of the Transvaal, situated 88 miles from Johannesburg, population 5,000. It was the original seat of the Boer government, and later in 1880, one became the scene of Colonel Winslow's resistance to the Boers. After stoutly holding out, starving and fighting, and losing 1/3 of his men, he surrendered to Cronje, only to find that 10 days previously an armistice had been proclaimed. Pretoria, the capital of the Transvaal, lies 32 miles north of Johannesburg, population 12,000. It has many fine public buildings, the chiefest being the splendid government buildings, which were erected at a cost of £200,000. The newly completed courts of justice are also immensely imposing. There is an English cathedral and many churches of all denominations, a public library, a public hospital, a museum, some large hotels, and several clubs, notably the Pretoria Club. The President's house is at the western extremity of Church Street, the main business thoroughfare. The new market buildings on Market Square were erected at a cost of £35,000. Rand, short of Witwatersrand. Reconnaissance, the art of reconnoitering, examining a portion of the country with a view to ascertaining its resources for movements and subsistence of the army. Regiment consists of 2 or more battalions of infantry. A cavalry regiment is composed of 3 or 4 squadrons. Rooinek, Boer name for the British signifying red neck. Rustenburg, population 500, situated east of Pretoria near the Magaliesburg Range. Shell, a hollow projectile filled with explosives so arranged as to act by means of a fuse, and at a certain point in time, spread destruction by the forcible dispersion of its fragments. The common shell, which is used for destroying earthworks, fortifications, and solid matters, is filled with powder which forms the bursting charge, and is fitted with either a time or a percussion fuse according to the nature of ordnance from which it is fired. The shrapnel shell is similar in external form, but is filled with bullets sand shot, cemented together with rosin. It was invented by Colonel Shrapnel, R.A. in 1808. The object in using shrapnel shell is to give the projectile at long distances the power and efficacy of case shot, and to cover a large space of ground with its effects. Against artillery, it has the effect of placing men and horses hors de combat, which is the most efficacious way of silencing the fire of a battery. Shelter trenches. Trenches constructed in the presence of the enemy as cover for troops from the action of shot and shell. Siege, a regular organized attack on a fortified position by means chiefly of artillery. Sir John Jones, the author of Peninsular Sieges, says the most celebrated commanders and best engineers are agreed that as a general principle, the besieging army should vary in proportion to the strength of the garrison according to the numbers of the garrison, and as an approximation have fixed that proportion at 5-1 when the garrison consists of 15,000 men, 6-1 when of 10,000 men, 7-1 when of 5,000, 8-1 when of 3,000, and in still greater proportion when it consists of a less number. This curious computation is explained by the fact that the more numerous the garrison, the smaller the besieging army need be in proportion to it, since the attack of a similar front or fronts of fortification is little different. If the garrison contain 5,000 or 10,000 men, the guards of the trenches and other duties increase proportionately, but the work does not. Sprout a stream. Spy persons sent into the enemy's camp to gain information regarding the intentions of the enemy. There are two classes of spy: the spies who betray their own people to the enemy, and those who go to the enemy in the interests of their own party. In both cases, martial law orders the death of a detected spy. Squadron, a fourth division of a cavalry regiment, divided in 2 troops each, commanded by a captain. Stad, a town. Staff, a body of officers appointed to assist a general in command, to form a link between him and the various branches of the army, and thus give coherence to all its parts. Subaltern, a term applied to a commissioned officer in the army under the rank of captain. Succor, assistance in men, stores, or ammunition. Sword, offensive weapon in use throughout the world, one of the arms of the British cavalry. During the Anglo-Saxon period, swords were made of iron, 2-edged, long, and straight. Team, 2 or more horses or animals harnessed together. Trek, a journey. Troop, 2 troops form a cavalry squadron. Each troop is commanded by a captain and 2 lieutenants. Tugela River, river dividing Zululand from Natal. Chile town, 340 miles from Pretoria. The junction of several roads radiating towards Victoria, Bulawayo, Mangwe, Mafeking, and Pretoria. The direct road from Chile to Bulawayo, cut in 1874 for the Zeederberg service of coaches, now discontinued, reduced the distance from Pretoria to Bulawayo to 500 miles. Uitlander, a resident in the Transvaal not entitled to the franchise. The term is generally applied to Europeans resident in or around Johannesburg, of which before the war there were some 50,000, mostly British. See Val, IP 146. Uitspan, to unharness and halt, the reverse of inspan. Uniform, dress of officer or soldier, so called because men of same rank and duties are clothed in a uniform manner. Union Jack, national flag of Great Britain. The original English flag was the banner of St. George. On the Union of Scotland with England, the banner of St. Andrew was added, and on the Union of Ireland, that of St. Patrick. It now consists of a red and white diagonal cross, the last 2 being side by side on a blue ground. Unit, Euclid describes number to be a collection of units. In military organization, the term unit is applied to a single portion upon which any part of an army, regiment, and sea is formed. A company is the unit of a regiment, a battery, that of a brigade of artillery. Unlimber, too, to disconnect the limber from the gun or carriage. Veld, an open plain. Victoria Cross, a decoration in form of a bronze Maltese cross, conferred on members of the Army, Navy, or volunteers who have distinguished themselves in face of the enemy by abnormal deeds of valor at risk of their lives. The V.C. was instituted in 1856 at the conclusion of the Crimean War, when 62 were earned. The cross was then made from the cannon captured at Sebastopol with the royal crest in the center and underneath the words "For Valor." It is worn with a red ribbon in the Army, a blue one in the Navy. Vierkleur, four-colored Boer flag. The colors are red, white, and blue in horizontal lines, with a perpendicular line of green near the staff. Volunteers, citizen soldiers who voluntarily fight in defense of their country. The oldest volunteer corps is the Hun Artillery Company, instituted in 1485. The volunteer movement gained ground in 1793-94 when invasion was threatened by France. The force enrolled number 0, of which 41,000 were Irish. Voortrekker, one of the early trekkers. War, the present war is the 40th war that has taken place during the reign of Queen Victoria. In 1854 there was the Crimea. In 1838, 1849, and came wars against Afghanistan, 4 wars against China in the years 1841, 1856, 1849, and 2 against the Sikhs in 1845, and 3 against the Kafirs in 1846, 1854, and 3 against Burma, 1850, 1852, and 9 in India in 1857, 1860, 1863, 1864, 1868, 1869, 1890, 1895, and 3 in Ashanti, 1864, 1873, and a war against Abyssinia, 1867, a war against Persia, 1852, a war against the Zulus, 1878, a war against the Basutos, 1878, a war in Egypt, 1882, 3 in the Soudan, 1894, 1896, and a war with Zanzibar, 1890, a war against the Matabele, 1894, and finally 2 wars against the Transvaal, 1881 and 1900. Waterworks. The waterworks at Sanna's Post, on the Madder River, are situated 20 miles from Bloemfontein. By means of powerful pumps, the water is raised from the level of the river to the top of Bushman's Kop, nearly halfway to the town. From that point it flows into Bloemfontein by the force of gravitation. The works are capable of delivering 250,000 gallons of water daily. There are 34 miles of pipes, laid down at a cost of £80,000. Yeomanry. The yeomanry cavalry of Great Britain is chosen from among the gentlemen and yeomen of each county. They are liable to be called out in aid of the civil power, and in case of invasion would have to assemble for actual service. For imperial yeomanry, see Vol, Roman 3, p. 168. Zululand, situated northeast of Natal, east of the Transvaal, and south of Amatongaland. Area, about 10,456 miles. Population 170,000, including only 1,200 whites. It became part of Natal in 1897. Gold and various minerals have been found there in appreciable quantities.